Okay, Assalamu alaikum everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another amazing Saturday session with the Book of Illuminations. I want to start by talking about the very special khutbah we had yesterday. And I know a lot of people wrote in to say, why is Sheikh not there? Is he sick? And no, alhamdulillah, he wasn't ill, but he was definitely exhausted from a very busy and difficult semester so far, but we thought it was an amazing opportunity for Sharif to give the khutbah, and it was amazing, honestly. It made me want to cry because it was so great. But the title of it is The Delusion of Fear and the Power of Being Human. And, it was extremely wise, very deep, very prescriptive, very hopeful. And yes, I am his mom, so yes, I am biased. But I think that if you go back and you listen very carefully to what he's saying, there's so much wisdom, so much thought, so much learning, alhamdulillah, certainly from, the entire Tafsir project. But just, what made me so proud is just, for someone in his generation to be able to give a khutbah that is, so incisive and prescriptive for our times. So the idea of the delusion of fear and the power of being human is that, the idea that we are humans in need, we are created in need, as the Quran tells us, and that oftentimes we go out of our way to avoid this fear by filling it with, or need, I guess his idea of need, and which opens up fear for all kinds of things, and we go out of our way to organize our lives or our desires in such a way as to avoid that fear. And so much of that comes from even an avoidance of God and divinity, and what is actually right and wrong, and that this is also a sense of living in like our world where there's so much that is overwhelming that we kind of look at all the things that are happening in the world that are not going right, and we say, what's the point? What is our ability to change anything? And so you sort of even convince yourself that there's no point in trying because everything is sort of stacked against you. And he talks about very beautifully the power of being human and the power of what one person can do to change, whether it's you being kind to another person, whether it's even fighting yourself and your ego and your own sense that maybe you can't do anything. It's a very beautiful, deep khutbah. I really encourage people, if you haven't seen it, to go back and watch, to read it. And for someone in his generation to talk about things that are so pertinent, not just to his generation, but to everyone. We live in a time that is so full of darkness, that he offers some solutions for how we can make change. It's really touching and really beautiful. It also reveals certainly a lot of what he has been learning, in his field of psychology and meshing that with what he's learned here in this Islamic space. And, he recently did the talk, Sharif and Baba, which also got deep into that topic. And that was also extremely valuable for people if you haven't seen it yet. The thing that really struck me about that, this idea that people are searching, they're in fear, they're empty. It's an ongoing issue that obviously we've talked about here. It's also extremely personal. Like Mito came home this weekend, and I had a conversation with him about his friends. Now he's sort of outside of the home bubble and interacting with kids his age that come from all different kinds of backgrounds. And I was so shocked when he was telling me some of the stories about how kids his age have Tinder, which is this app that basically commodifies you, right? You post your own picture, your own whatever, as a means for connecting with other people to have sex. And it is, and he was telling me about how many people had this app that he's come across, and how they were looking on the Tinder app and seeing other people at his university also similarly with this mechanism, really to say, hey, do you like how I look? Do I look attractive to you? Do you want to have sex with me? Let's connect, let's match up. And even for people to say, oh, how many races have you had? How many colors have you had? This to me, it was so disturbing and shocking at so many levels, but it really, again, drives home a lot of people feel lost. They feel like they're searching for love in all the wrong places. They don't feel comfortable in their skin. They don't know necessarily what is right and what is wrong. Back to what Sharif was talking about in the khutbah, when we have the furqan, the criterion that God gives us between what is right and wrong, this is like a moral compass that we can use to guide, or at least even avoid such horrific, situations where, so anyway, this just hurt me so much because obviously this is our future. These are our kids. It doesn't have to be that they're Muslim kids. They are kids in our generation that are interacting with one another. They're learning from one another. And so, on the one hand, it's a really sad situation. On the other hand, khutbahs like Sharif's give me hope because, it reveals the solution, the answer, the mechanism for making things better. And I'm proud of both of our sons because they, they've been raised on this methodology here, this idea of, having God at your center, looking for meaning, looking for hope, creating goodness. And, I was touched also, when Mita was sharing this, how he conveyed to me like how he feels comfortable in his own skin because he was raised in this environment and we were very intentional about raising him, both him and Sharif obviously, with this moral compass, which now he sees many of his cohorts don't have. So he also values what he was raised with, which maybe he took for granted before. But so that's why I also am so grateful for this learning. I had that experience in my own journey, and that's why I really believe in what we do here. It's so valuable, it's so necessary, and critical for our future generations. So for that, I am just what we do here is just so important, and I hope that people will spread the word if people haven't come across people who are looking for. What is that meaning and what does the Quran really have to say for us? So with that, I'm so grateful to be here again for another session, and thank you, Sheikh, as always, for the Book of Illuminations, for the tafsir, and for another wonderful night of learning, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين محمد المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Okay, so we let's say we started in the 50s, which deal with al-waridat. Al-waridat, the idea of the gift of enlightenment, a gift of luminous perception. Al-waridat are also known as a tajalliyat. Tajalli is another word that describes the same concept. And there's several of these aphorisms that are so close together. So in 51 is where the idea that al-warida or tajalli is nur ilahi. It's a gift of enlightenment that comes directly from Allah, and we'll see that in 51, 52, 53, 54, and is laying out the conditions which are conducive to be a recipient of this illumination that transforms your state. Because, as we said, that once you have the experience of the veil lifting, there's no going back. You're transformed, because what you see of reality is, it's such a powerful experience that it reconstructs the way that you interpret the reality that you live in. Did we talk about وارد الانتباه, وارد الإقبال, and وارد الوصال? Okay. So we talked about the three levels of وارد الانتباه, the initial sort of the initial visitation, and then we وارد الإقبال, which is the higher level, and then وارد الوصال, which is the ultimate level. So we've talked about that. And critical to this idea, and this is probably review, is the concept of fana, is that the more your consciousness is occupied by the other, anything but Allah, the more difficult it is for the warid to visit you, for the tajalli to visit you, for that luminous visitation. And did we talk about how it's more difficult, fana'ul nafs is more difficult than fana'ul kawn? Okay. So one of the things that you learn, both from a good teacher and also from experience, is that the process of organizing reality in your consciousness, as you're doing your dhikr, you're doing your ibadah, you're doing your self-confrontation, you're doing your cleansing, all the things that we've talked about. Because by now you're in the aphorisms of the 50s. So if you are practicing this dynamic, you have already gone for quite a while working very hard at cleansing and at opening yourself to the realities, and we'll even use this language of realities beyond the dimension that we live in. And so you're now, so part of that is that you are emptying the self of how your contingent subjectivities vis-a-vis the material world. So this is, they describe it as fana, as sort of the usually it translated as extinction or what's another word for fana? Annihilation. As annihilation of the self. But what annihilation, it's not that you become, because a lot of people have a very stereotypical understanding of it, that annihilation means that you become an insane, irrational human being. It's not that at all. But al-fana, the whole notion of annihilation is, I mean, interestingly, even the khutbah that Sharif gave, is that you are working hard not to be preoccupied with something, not to be in fear, in anxiety. And so one of the things is that you learn that the biggest challenge in transforming your trust to Allah and in opening yourself, if you will, if clearing the space so that the divine can enter, it's actually an easier challenge to combat or to resist material reality than it is to combat your preoccupation with the nafs, with the self. That the truth of the matter is we are, and this is the more you engage in this process, the more you understand the extent at which we are so self-referential. For instance, I mean, one of the lessons that just stuck with me is that although we see death all the time, I mean, we the longer you live, the more you see people who lived life fully, where death was truly unimaginable to them. And we see these people with all their subjectivities, all their preferences, all their likes, all their dislikes, all their issues that they would talk about constantly pass away. And yet, there is something in the self that is constantly in a state of disbelief about death. As if all will die but the I, which is, of course, entirely irrational, because at a rational level, we all know that we're going to die. But yet, if you reflect upon the self, you will see the extent to which the self is a state of suspended disbelief. It is constantly fooling itself and treating the world, dealing with the world, as if it is in fact the center of the world. That as if its judgments make things true or untrue, or as if its pleasure is the measurement for what is good or bad. We are so self-referential that nafs within it is the greatest obstacle, even greater than overcoming our dependence on material realities. So that الفناء عن النفس أصعب من الفناء عن الكون. That learning to deconstruct, annihilate, فناء, material realities is in fact less of a challenge than learning to deconstruct the despotism of the self. And the more, what is that the more you are going to gain mastery over the self, the more you are going to scrutinize. They always say accuse the self. You go اتهام النفس, that you are going to strip the self of its defenses, of its lies, of its deceptions. Strip the self of the way that it always makes excuses for itself. Strip the self from its inflated ego and its selfishness. that logic, if you take the logic of creation, what the logic of creation tells you that the place of that self, the entitlement of the self compared to everything else in creation is actually quite small. But it is not logic that guides us. It is a sense of, in fact, illogical passion. And the illogical passion is what always makes us self-centered. Now, so it is fair to say that the more you gain mastery over the self, the more you subordinate the self to a higher being, and we'll talk about the higher beings in a second, within the I, so that the I is not just the self, but it is more than the self. The greater receptivity that you will have to التجليات or الواردات, in other words, to that visitation of luminosity, of illumination, that these anwar al-ilahiyya, as we will talk about, or as it's often described. Okay, so this, I mean, a lot of this overlaps from one aphorism to another. So in 51, إنما أورد عليك الوارد لتكون به عليه واردة. We've already talked about this, right? إنما أورد عليك الوارد. Okay, right? Yeah. The only thing that I just want to add to this, because this is 51 is where we talk about وارد الوصال, وارد الإقبال, and so on. Is one of the Quran speaks, was it in 51 that one second. I'm forgetting whether it was in 51 or another aphorism. Oh, okay, yeah. The reason it's that often either 51, yeah. So, okay, 51, which again we discussed last halakha, that visitation, when it is experienced, it is like an invitation to the divine. And this is where we talked about the three levels, warad al-wusal, warad al-iqbal, and so on. So this is all in reference to the past halaqah. So actually, let's talk about the Quranic passage that I was thinking of in the context of 52. Okay. أورد عليك الوارد ليتسلمك من يد الأغيار وليحررك من رق الآثار. Did we talk about this one at all? No? Okay. So, the important thing there, some of the phrasing here. Okay, let's see. How did? Yeah. So the raw translation, God made the Warid translated as inspiration, but it's not really an inspiration. It is an entire visitation, the luminosity of the visitation of light upon your soul. God made the visitation come upon you so as to get you out of the grip of alterities and free you from the bondage to created things. Okay. So أورد عليك الوارد ليتسلمك من يد الأغيار. الأغيار is what in this translation it's translated as alterities. We'll talk about this in a second. وليحررك من رق الآثار, from slavery. He translates al-athar as created things. Al-athar could also be translated as to free you from slavery to contingent things. In both situations, the critical, the substantive idea is what's more important. So that luminous visitation, which is also an invitation, you must understand it, as we talked about already, as an act of grace. It is not something that you earned, although you work very hard for it, but nevertheless, it is not something that you earned, but it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it must be received as a gift and an invitation. Not an entitlement, not a right, because if you do not give it its due, it will quite, in every sense, will become just a one-time experience, and you'll live your entire life in the shadow of that single experience, more puzzled by it than anything else. Well, in order to avoid that, you must understand its nature. And its nature is Allah looking down upon you and looking onto your path, and Allah gifting you this invitation. Now, the invitation, the very nature of the invitation, is to get you on a path, on a sirat, where the mission is liberation. In every sense of the word, the mission is freedom. So, يتسلمك من يد الأغيار, so that you will understand that through your relationship with Allah, you are freed from your emotional, psychological dependency on everything else. You no longer see things as having a compelling power over you, but everything is subject to the compelling power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, this is the fear that Sharif was talking about in his khutbah becomes something that you look at as unacceptable to your faith. That to live in fear of alterities or contingencies or happenstance or circumstance, it is something inconsistent with your relationship with Allah. Because all things are in Allah's hands. When you reach that stage that is the stage where you truly understand what it means to be a Abdullah. Those of us that say that slavery from the very beginning, human slavery, is slavery of one human to another, was entirely inconsistent with Islam. This is the genesis of this idea. Now, in the Quran, the Quranic verse in Surah Al-Zumar, when Allah says, ضرب الله مثلا رجلا فيه شركاء متشاكسون, where God talks about an example, and I talked about this ayah in a khutbah a long time ago, وَرَجُلًا سَلِمًا لِرَجُلٍ, that when Allah talks about the example of a person and says, a person who is owned by another person. This ayah in Surah Al-Zumar, literally, I think it's Zumar 19, or Zumar 19 or 20 or something like that. That imagine that there is a person who is owned by multiple parties. Imagine the conflicted state of this person. Such a person cannot be compared to someone whose status is undisputed. So, and the meaning of the ayah is not about human slavery of a human to another, but about our relationship to Allah. So Allah's telling you, if you are in life subject to multiple masters, then the nature of your servitude or my status as Allah, as your master, is complicated and ambiguous. So the fact that you have in life masters other than Allah. Now, at the legal technical level, a master such as in the days of slavery, someone that actually owns you, or at a more realistic level in terms of what all of us experience, is the masterhood of material things over us, and material needs and material considerations, and how we relate to them and how we understand them. And at even a deeper level, the masterhood of your nafs, of your weak self, your selfish, self-centered, egotistical self over you. Now, so in Surah Al-Zumar, what Allah is saying to you is that in order to be truly subject only to my masterhood, you must understand, or you must rid yourself of the sense of servitude to all others, including your own self. Is that clear? So in fact, I mean, it blows my mind that there's someone in the modern world that takes this ayah and thinks that it's somehow a justification of slavery in Islam, because it is exactly the opposite. As the function of this Quranic discourse is exactly the opposite. It's telling you, liberate yourself from everything, including subjugation to your very self, if you want to understand the relationship of Allah to you. Now, as we will see, because inshallah, when we get to the end of the 50s, what this is leading us to is that as you grow in your relationship to Allah, first, it's as this journey gets to the point where you transcend even the desire for heaven. that the Jannah itself is no longer the object. It is beyond Jannah. I mean, one of the things that I had thought of a long time ago of writing an essay called Beyond Jannah, because it's really, that's what the theology is. It's that what is beyond Jannah? It's Allah. So you are, the veils that are lifted, one of these veils, as we'll talk about, is your the lowliness of, in terms of a lowly status, of saying the reason that I am Abdullah, that I am Allah's, I am Abdullah. It's like translations are, or my servitude to Allah is that because I want a reward. That in itself is a veil. That in itself is a hujub. And when you, through your relationship, you lift that veil, what is beyond the veil of Jannah is Allah, the ultimate salvation. So, okay. So, now, one of the critical notions here is that whether it's introduced in aphorisms 50 or 51 or 52, I mean, I've heard different practices, but that as long as when you, how to put it, as long as, or let me put it differently, in direct proportion to the diminutive status of the self within you will be Allah's role within you. So let's state that a bit differently. So the more you are occupied by the self, the more you relate to yourself through the self. So the self, as we will talk about in a second, the self is that level of consciousness that is anchored on fear or need, as Sharif was describing in his khutbah, anchored on which often gets stated with the way that as you're trying to claim dignity, as you're trying to claim izzah for yourself, the way that you articulate the fear and the need, the anxiety, is through claims of entitlement. So when you become, and this is often in relation to your education and to your wealth, is that as God gives you more gifts, gives you more education, gives you more wealth, then you no longer want to say, I need or I fear, so you state it as an entitlement. You become sort of arrogant about it. Well, of course, this is what I have a right to because I am whoever you define yourself as. But in fact, that self, that nafs, is the greatest obstacle to al-waridat or tajalliyat. It's the greatest obstacle to the visitations of light that allow you to see beyond this dimension with all its limitations. So the more inflated the self within you, the less the space within you for God. So although, and this is what they say is the status, and we'll see as we go on, is the status of Islam for the vast majority of believers. The vast majority of believers are Muslims, meaning they recognize God's masterhood in principle, but not in reality. In reality, the true master is the self. And there is this sort of abstract theoretical recognition that yes, God ought to be the master, but really, the one that I've had all my experiences with, the one that I know, I mean, or think I know, is the self. The one that I've from the time I was a child, from the first time that I, started crying as a baby, all my experiences have been with the self. Do I know God? Well, yeah, from text. Text tell me God wants this, God wants that, so I do it. But I do it sometimes. I sometimes I concentrate. Sometimes I don't concentrate. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I'm sleepy. Sometimes I'm bored. Sometimes all of that are experiences with the self. I don't have the capacity to go beyond the self. Sometimes I sacrifice because I know from the text, not because I had a direct experience with God, but I know from the text that this is what God wants. So I, go to Hajj, for instance, or pay zakah, for instance, and I feel good because I know logically, intellectually, I'm obeying. But do I have a direct experience of companionship with the divine? Can I say anything personal to myself, not to others, about my experience with the attributes of divinity, my experience with the Dhat al-Ilahiyya, the very self of divinity? No. Now, why no? Because all my life, relating to the law, relating to the text, relating to Sharia, not to Haqiqah, all my experiences were mediated and negotiated through the inflated self. All that occupies me within is the self, which is fine. But that is precisely why all you want is to avoid hellfire. God, please don't punish me. I don't want pain. And to say, I want Jannah and I want enjoyment, material enjoyment. You can't imagine an enjoyment beyond the material because you haven't experienced the divine. It is, you have no frame of reference to say there is the material, all the honey and the fruits and the rivers and all of that in Jannah. That's actually not where real joy comes from. That's not really where real happiness comes from. So that's why that's the frame of reference, is because all sense of enjoyment is still this. It goes through the self. So huge. That is why I keep emphasizing this point, because it is really true. That is why for instance, that is why I've said in the past that when a student, I've seen some of my teachers, when they've seen a student eager to correct others, they sort of disqualify them from their training. Like basically they told them, okay, I don't want you as my student. And someone said, this sounds really harsh. And I completely understand why it sounds really harsh for people who have not experienced this process. The point is that if you are listening to so many halaqas that tell you your path is to confront the self, is to cleanse the self, is to shrink the self. And after all of this, your attention goes to what the other is doing rather than what you are doing, then there is a fatal flaw. Then there is something really wrong about what you've learned. So it is not just gratuitous, meanness. It is actually, in many ways, when you find it's like, okay, maybe you should go attend the halaqas, because it's not like you're kicked out of all the halaqas. Remember, in this context, there are plenty of halaqas from all types of schools of thought and all types of orientations going on. You go attend the law halaqas, you go attend the hadith halaqas, you go attend the tafsir halaqas. In other words, you are a person of the literal, the external. You are a person of Islam, but not beyond, not ihsan. Unfortunately, there are people just who, to them, they have some type of obstacle. The willpower to work beyond is just wanting. And of course, just in defense of the shuyukh, when you have students knocking at your door all the time, because there's an overabundance of students, you don't have time to waste with someone who doesn't get it after 6 months of training, and they're still acting like one of the people of externalities. Your time is best invested with someone else. And so it's a different culture, it's a different world than we have here, which is, just very difficult, very different. Okay, anyway. So, yeah. One of the things that, this is just, maybe, I don't know how Rami does it, but he finds, like I say something and then he finds where some text where it's actually written. So, I don't know, it involves a computer or some weird stuff with a computer. But one of the, huh?
Give me some credit.
Oh, yeah, he has encyclopedic knowledge. He just has it all memorized, and it's not the computer. He just knows where it is. So here's okay. So it's an important. And I'll translate it, and then we'll see. Say الأنوار واردات مطايا القلوب. واردات مطايا القلوب تحملها إلى علام الغيوب، وهي أيضا مطايا الأسرار تحملها إلى جبروت العزيز الجبار. Okay, so that's the, what am I saying? So these illuminations are, as we'll see, it is supposed to carry you beyond your consciousness, to what they refer to as a qulub, the heart. So what that means is that it's now the illuminations, these affirmations and invitations come to you to help you get beyond mere consciousness to the intuitive self within, to the soul of the fitrah that was encoded in you by Allah. It's like meeting your encoding, and you say, wow. So this is the way God coded me before the experiences of life shaped me. So mataya qulub. So this is now it takes you to the intuitive, what they refer to as the heart. What that means is the intuitive essence. To avoid using the word self again, but the intuitive essence. That now, when you meet that intuitive essence, you will meet your Lord. God is with the intuitive essence. It's inescapable, inevitable. And this is why the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that said, if you want to know your God, know yourself. That's what it means. That you get beyond the consciousness of greed and fear and coveting. Remember when we talked about coveting, what you covet. And you get to that qalb within, that intuitive essence. Now, but every visitation, every warida, every tajalli, what they refer to as al-asrar is the knowledge of the reality beyond reality. So when the first time you get an iwarida or a tajalli, you are excited, you are puzzled, you are confused, you are a little bit scared, you are, all types of emotions. But if you persist and you shrink the self, you shrink the ego, and the visitations continue, now the second and the third, you are going to be much more calm, much calmer. And each experience, the understandings and the perceptions and the awareness, they refer to as the asrar, the secrets. Why are they referred to as asrar? Because they're, as I said, they're very personal, and other than your sheikh, you don't talk about them. The minute if you talk about them so that they're leveraged, even unintentionally, for prestige or for asbab dunyawiyya, for godly, for worldly purposes, where people admire you more or look up to you more, whatever, they've corrupted. You've committed. It's like, these types of things where if they're exposed to the air, they become corrupted. It's like that. The asrar are like that. They are the greatest gift that could be given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and preserving them from the corruptions of humanly things like prestige, power, greed, all the things that desires, whatever, money, sex, whatever it is. Preserving them from, so even it's preferable that you don't even tell your spouse about them. You don't go to your spouse and say, oh, I just had this experience. Because there are power dynamics that between you and your spouse. And yes, you're tempted, you're going to be tempted to share with your family. But if you have a good teacher, he'll tell you, do not. Not even your family. Because they're very personal. And the more you protect them, the more you will get knowledge of the world of Jabarut. We say the ultimate truth. Now, The Jabarut is the world beyond the Malakut in this context, because I've used Jabarut before to refer to the physical world, but in this context, the Jabarut is the world beyond the Malakut, meaning the universe as it exists without agency other than God's agency. So things like, what's the relationship between choice and predestination? How could there be that we see, for instance, some people who are, what is the word I'm looking for? Who have foresight, like the people who can tell you something like will happen in the future. Clairvoyance, yeah. Like, how could there be clairvoyance? Like, there's a very famous clairvoyant known, I think his name was John Gacy, who was, wrote, you can even read one of the books he wrote, where he was known for people visiting him, and he would tell them things that are going to happen in the future, and so many of his predictions came true. There are people who have the power of healing. I mean, as much as modern science wants to deny that, but it's a documented reality that you can go to people who can heal you. How do you understand these things? Well, as long as you live in the world of material reality, you're not going to understand these things. All your understanding is limited to causal relations. Do you get insights into these things? Absolutely. I mean, some, like Ibn Arabi, for instance, couldn't help but leak out. So if you read Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah carefully and you understand what someone like Ibn Arabi is saying, you can clearly see that he had understandings beyond rational understanding. But he also, and this is, I haven't read anyone who wrote about this in the modern age, but he also came under criticism by a lot of Sufis for revealing too much. Because, yeah, I mean, we get into whether it's counterproductive to. It is not about, so then you get someone that says, well, what is the benefit of this? Then you don't understand. It's not about benefit or harm. It's about reality. It's about the reality of the divine and the centeredness of the divine to everything in existence. That, for instance, that everything is merely an extension of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As much as you try to rationally get some type of handle this idea, you're not going to succeed. But again, if you pursue this path because of your love or your curiosity, I'm pursuing this path because I just want to understand what predestination is, or I just want to understand how you're not going to get the illuminations at Tajalliyah, because the only reason you pursue this path is your love of the divine. That is the only thing that will open the doors and open the insights to you. Okay, so let's go to 53 because it builds upon this.
That quote that you read was in Ibn Ajiba.
The quote that I just said? Yeah, Rami, from his encyclopedic knowledge, remembered that it's Ibn Ajiba who said the quote that I was... that I remembered from somewhere. Okay. Um, let's أورد عليك الوارد ليخرجك من سجن وجودك إلى فضاء شهودك. Okay. So he made an inspiration, a warid, come upon you so as to take you out of the prison of your existence into the unlimited space of your contemplation. Okay. So أورد عليك الوارد, he sent you the invitation, the illumination, the enlightenment, the warid, ليخرجك من سجن وجودك, to take you out of the prison of your existence. إلى فضاء شهودك, to the expanse. Here he translates this as the unlimited space of your contemplation. I understand why he translates shuhudika as contemplation, but no, to the unlimited expanse, in other words, to the liberation of the world of shuhud. The world of shuhud, yes, it is a world built upon contemplation. After all, it is the world where you shrink the self and master the self and push the self so that the other powers within will emerge or will come out. But the world of shuhud is not just the world of contemplation. The world of shuhud is the world of true perception. Because all of us, and this is, I've had so many debates with secularists, and they'll say, "Oh no, we don't feel what the world is prison." But then, this is just what life has said. Some of the people that have told me we don't see the world as prison, ended up. I actually know someone who I used to have debates with when I was in prison, and then he committed suicide years later. I don't see. No, you're not right. I don't feel the world is prison. You religious people, why do you always talk about the world as if it's a prison and blah blah, all that stuff? But then so many experiences in life, then you discover that they had family problems, that their kids tell you that they were horrible parents, that they lived on tranquilizers, that they've lived on antidepressants, that they were, drank, they were alcoholics, and just so many endless stories that life has just the world without Allah and without the role, the deceptive role of your ego is a very scary place. The way we conquer that fear, that scary place that we find ourselves in, is that the ego grows. Now, the ego, when it has wealth, it empowers it to even grow more and more, becomes more and more aggressive, more and more tyrannical, more and more entitled. It starts assuming things like, I can decide who lives and dies. I've often looked at politicians who, for example, decide to send a strike, and they kill, they've assassinated this person and assassinated this person, and they go attend a classical music concert and sit there and smile, and they're happy, and and that's precisely what the ego does, is that the ego actually convinced them that because they're president of a country, or because they have a position in the CIA, or because they're a senator, that they have the right to make these life and death decisions and exterminate people, and because they think, or to do even worse, when they make decisions to torture people, or can you imagine these people who made the decisions to throw people in Guantanamo, where for 20 years they're in prison without charges, being tortured and mistreated? What the ego can do, now, the ego can also do that armed with the deceptions of divine will. So in the same way the ego can do it without God, the ego can convince itself, I have God's approval in being a tyrant and a despot and doing all the horrible things in the world. Now, of course, as a believer, as a Muslim, I am more offended when the ego does it under the claim of divine authority than when the ego does it without the claim of divine authority. But the point is that the ego, the growth of the ego, is a response to so many of the insecurities that we confront the world, and we start thinking, oh, well, we live in a world of limited resources, so we must reserve the greatest share, an unfair share, to ourselves. So, and that's how you get the game of nations, right? The ego says, oh, we can't all share the world's resources, so we must play dirty to make sure that this country gets, our people get ahead regardless of the consequence. And as a result, you end up doing what we've done in this world, destroy planet Earth. So, but it is the ego often, although it often never overcomes its insecurities, and that's why it remains belligerent and antagonistic and hostile and unfriendly. So although it makes you feel good for a while, but it goes back to its sense of insecurities and its belligerence. And that's also how you end up with so many divorces, so many broken homes, so many ruined relationships, so much so much of the evil of the world. It goes back to that essential thing. In this past, that feeling that so much of modernity, invented everything from, Western versions of yoga and Western versions of meditation and the pharmaceutical industry and the counseling industry and all of that is because the ego and the demands of that ego, and because Allah is not accessible to us, to modern human being, to the modern self. And this is precisely the point, that in this journey, the illuminations of the divine make you or take you to a point where you taste true liberation for the first time in your life. True liberation, true tranquility, true repose, true serenity. It's like, at one point in my life, out of ignorance, because I didn't know, doctors said, oh, I was in a lot of pain because of health reasons. And I would fall back on my training to deal with the pain until doctors, I was at Yale, and they had convinced me that, why live in pain? Take painkillers. So it was Oxy. And I remember the first time I took an oxy pill. And I remember it really well because it was, I wish I could describe it to you. I would describe it as it mimicked, but in a very gaudy and very trashy way, the first experience I had with itajalli. It's as if that feeling of lightness, it's as if your body disappeared, all the difficulties in the world disappeared, all the worries in the world disappeared, as if you have a lightness of being and you can do anything. But with the oxy, there was something very trashy about it. Something very gaudy, and in fact, it went away very quickly. I mean, unlike the tajalli, where it is a journey, with oxy, it wasn't a journey, it was a trip. And there's a huge difference. Alhamdulillah, even alhamdulillah, now I'm oxy free and I deal with pain the way that pain, in my view or in my experience, should be dealt with. It's through the resources of the self, because the chemicals are just horrendous. But that experience completely allowed me to understand why so many people, it's so easy for them to become addicts, because the first time, or it's as if you found the answer to everything. And most people would have no clue that that's what itajalli is, or that's what warid is, but in a far more meaningful and lasting sense. That same feeling of, oh, I found the answer. So anyway, okay. So still at 50, okay, so from the whole idea of that emerging out of the sense of a prison to an expanse, an unlimited expanse, and a sense of liberation, because it is very much, you realize that once you get beyond the material world, once you get beyond the dimension that we're in, you are visiting the idea of infinity. I mean, can you imagine an experience with infinity? It is so alien to us because it doesn't. What does it mean for something to exist forever? That's the expanse that you are taken to in the world of shuhud, in the world of true perception. And that's why it is a liberation. Now, though, a really important point, and here, okay, so they say, okay, that النور is a نكتة تقع في القلوب. it is like, it comes to you and it's like a seed. And there is a dynamic. They say that you start out with a nafs, you go to the aql, you start out with the self, you go to the intellect, then you go to the qalb, to the heart, which I said is the intuitive original condition. You go from there to the rawh, to the spirit, and from the rawh you reach the sir, the secret. Now, so what is this dynamic that I'm talking about? So the journey that I'm describing, they refer to it as shuhudul nafs ila shuhudillah, or illah. The journey that I'm describing is from the state of shuhud, where you are fully in the presence of the self and only the self. In other words, your reality is your consciousness and nothing but your consciousness. Your reality is your consciousness and nothing but your consciousness. That's shuhudul nafs. Then the journey takes you from where you actually transcend the self and you are in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no longer solely in your consciousness. So first, we start with the nafs. The nafs is the level where you are struggling with your impulses, your fears, your desires, what you covet, what you want. That is the level of ma'asi and zunub, where you impulses. You feel, you covet something, sexual desire, desire to consume, the desire to material desire, the desire to spend money and enjoy things, and it is not subject to even reason. It is purely at the level of impulse and satisfaction and maximizing your utility, your personal utility. At that level, there is no waridat and there is no tajalliyat. I mean, it might be that Allah blesses you with an inspiration, but this is the a level where your consciousness occupies all the space, and there is no space, and that is why so many people who are at that level, they exist at the level of desire and nothing but desire, they really are puzzled by God. They really, I mean, our society especially, I mean, the sad thing is that society used to be more conducive to overcoming that self of passion or that realm of desire. Why? Because we had traditions and parents and tribes and communities that would, tell us, just because you feel like doing something, it doesn't mean you should do it. And, so it would get us to learn a little bit of self-restraint. And, there would be that self-restraint at least made God a little bit more accessible to us. But when you are raised where you're on your own and you have to sort of figure out whether you should answer the call of your own passion and your own desire, and that's it. It is really not at all puzzling that God is so remote and so far away and so difficult for most people to feel or to sense or to understand. And so that is precisely how you end up. I mean, if you live in the world of passion and desire, most people, by the way, they don't even have reason. They rationalize their passion and desire. So the stage of reason, of intellect, that's the next stage. But most people don't even get to that stage. The stage you're in is strictly the stage of passion and desire, and then putting the gloss of reason on passion and desire and arguing that whatever they desire, that's what reason calls for. But it's not real reason. And as a result, they're alienated from God because they're alienated from the original creation of the divine. To be even, I mean, not to scare you, but actually what the realm they live in is the realm of the devil, the realm of shaitan. The shayateen, the demonic in the world, they call that realm the realm of desires, the realm of the demonic, because that is the realm where they thrive. Reason is a little bit of a challenge to them, not an overwhelming challenge, but it is at least more of a challenge than the realm of desire. So if you live in the world of the demonic, in the dimension of the demonic, how do you expect to find Allah? It just doesn't make any sense. And that is why so many, young Muslims who are raised, conditioned to answer the call of desire and passion, come to you and say, we have a crisis of faith. Well, yeah, of course you have a crisis of faith. I mean, because you really, community, society, the educational system, your teachers have not helped you to access the divine, have not given you any tools that enable you. Just teaching you that the law says X, Y, Z is not going to be any type of empowerment against the call of passion and desire. Okay, so that's the level of a nafs. Now, the next level is when you learn to be disciplined on rational grounds. That's the level of al-aql. They call this martabat al-inzijar or martabat al-zajr, where you, at least your intellect, can think beyond the self to the collectivity. So you get to the point of saying, yeah, I might get ahead if I murder someone, but if everyone does that, then collectively society will lose out. So although I might feel, someone has really offended me and I might feel like I want to kill them, my intellect says, no, I shouldn't. Or maybe your intellect comes and says, I would enjoy cheating and betraying, but if I do that, I will hurt the people I love, and if everyone doesn't honor their commitments and cheats and betrays, we will end up with a society that can't trust relations. That's the level of aql. The level of aql makes more space to the divine, but again, it's a space where you access the divine through reason. The problem with accessing the divine through reason is that reason works in the realm of causality, the created world of physical rules and mathematical rules. 1 + 1 = 2. the realm of the divine is beyond the realm of causality. So, yes, you can access the handiwork of God, the logic of God. You can see that how God constructed this world according to mathematical precision and mathematical equations. You can investigate that. You can find the rules of physics and science. Now, if you're fortunate, your mind will make space for God in saying, well, all this precision cannot exist without an engineer and a maker and an intentionality, an actual inventor. But reason, unfortunately, also will sometimes lead to very deceptive results, like telling you somehow that, convincing you that somehow all this precision came by coincidence. But it is a higher stage. The vast majority of humanity, especially when our educational systems do not help us, are either stuck at these two levels, the nafs and the aql. Beyond the nafs and the aql is what they say the stage of a qalb, that stage where you have perceptions beyond the selfish consciousness and beyond the thinking of the intellect. So in this journey, there are people, and I was one of them, to be in full disclosure, my biggest challenge, to be, just share with you my own, was not my nafs. That wasn't my biggest challenge. Wasn't my passions or my desires. It was my aql. I had a very overwhelmingly intellectual mind that reasoned through everything, that had the capacity to understand philosophy and equations, and it tenaciously insisted on its masterhood. It refused to relinquish the position of masterhood. It dominated me so much that it was truly my master, and I was its servant. My biggest challenge, and each person is very individual, and that's a very personal journey, was to get beyond the masterhood, the hegemony of the intellect, and to rediscover the qalb, and to make way to the intuitive, primordial realities that Allah had encoded in me, rather than what Greek philosophy has taught me, for instance, or what Socrates, who had a great power over me, was Socrates far more than my intuitive sense. And that's what you work on if, with either a sheikh, or if you're on your own, by confronting and cleansing the self. Then once you go beyond initial openings and initial discoveries, and you reach a level of tranquility and stability, they call that maqam al-rawh, ruh, that where you are now have gained perceptions that you are not struggling back and forth between your intellect and your heart or your intuition. It's not that you see God sometimes and then you lose that feeling sometimes, but you're actually achieved tranquility and stability. It's as if God is before your eyes all the time. That's what they call maqam al-rawh. And then the final one is shuhud al-sirr, where you are in insight of the secret. Shuhud al-sirr. They actually, the way that is most often described as when the you, al-ant, returns to its origins. And when it returns to its origins, it sees nothing of the self, but fully realizes that it is but from God and of God. Lillah wa billah. That the only part of you that is really true and authentic is the divine you. The way that you are, in fact, an extraction from the divine. They often describe it as when there is no longer a you. It's the best way of reading about, there's a lot of people who've tried to walk this path, a lot of writings, but nothing really comes close to describing it like Sufi poetry. Because those who've reached that point, and when they tried to express it, they could not find other than literary devices to express it. And the stage of complete liberation. So النفس العقل القلب الروح السر. 5. And when we reach aphorism 53, or in some prints, is it 53 in both? No. No, wait. Yeah, in either 52 or 53, depending on the print that you're looking at. In the English translation that I have, it's 53. This English translation. No, 54 in this English translation. Yeah. Made it as a prison of your existence. So that's where there's a very heavy emphasis on the stages. Of course, for so much work is spent on النفس and العقل, مقام النفس, مقام العقل. By the time you get to مقام القلب, a lot of what you do is self-driven, because it just depends on the the actual effort that you put in, and the journey becomes very. It's like it's self-perpetuating. What time is it? What time is Maghrib over?
8:43.
Okay, so let's move to the one after. Yeah, Al-Anwar, it's very short. Al-Anwar Mataya Al-Qulub Wal-Asrar. Al-Anwar Mataya Al-Qulub Wal-Asrar. It is translated as, our lights are the riding mounts of hearts and of their innermost centers. Okay, so mataya is what what rides on something to deliver it. I mean, so for instance, you call camels mataya because you can ride on them. So, or you call saddles are also called mataya. So it is whatever carries and delivers. And 53 is just an affirmation or an elaboration or adding to the one before it. Yeah. So, and it's just an affirmation and a reminder that the tajalliyat or al-waridat, which are the anwar, is that these enlightenments, the visitations of the divine, you can call the visitations from the divine as an anwar because they are very much illuminosity and an illumination. That this is the mechanism by which you reach the stages of the heart, al-qalb, to al-rawh, to the sir. So that's why it says mataya al-qulub wal-asrar and the asrar here, although it's in the translations, translation innermost centers. And it's not, it's telling you or reminding you that it is as long as you are in the realm of the nafs and as long as you are in the realm of the aql, as long, and this is, if anyone who has tried or even got involved in this path for a while, they'll tell you, you are at the beginning when you're often preoccupied by the indulgences of the self, like for instance boredom. Oh, you start doing dhikr, and at the beginning when you're doing dhikr and you figuratively or practically watching time. It's like, oh, how much longer do I have to do dhikr for? You feel time. That's part of the stage of nafs, by the way, is that you very much, you feel like, I'm doing dhikr for 15 minutes, I'm doing dhikr for half an hour, I'm doing dhikr for an hour. You feel the time, you feel the impact of the time upon you. When the other thing is that when you often struggle with your reason, like, well, I am sacrificing this time to do dhikr. I could be reading a book. I mean, of course, the people that are, and the book could be teaching me something concrete that I can learn on. Is this really a constructive way of getting enlightenment in life? These people are telling me that the enlightenment is to go beyond material reality, and you're thinking, you're analyzing this. This is all of that is the challenge that beginners will often experience. And anyone that has tried this path will tell you, if they're honest, I mean, that's the other thing, is that how much they struggle with this. They struggle with the sort of the interrogations of reason, in making these evaluations between career objectives and time you spend seeking the illumination of the heart. I mean, you're still in the realm of this material world, and that's why you struggle with this. It is very difficult, as long as you are still in these stages, it is very difficult to experience the anwar, to have a genuine experience. I think I said this before. I once was speaking at the Islamic Center of Southern California, and I asked the audience, I said that Allah describes Islam as a journey from darkness to light, and that the process of Iman is Allah taking from darkness to light. And I asked the audience, what does that mean? And this is not exceptional to any particular audience in Islamic Center, but it's actually my experience is that the vast people just are stumped. They can't answer. What does that mean, from darkness to light? Because as long as they live in the world of nafs and aql, and in the world of nafs and aql, what does that mean, from darkness to light? The only way we know light is to turn on, light a candle or flip a switch to get electricity. Light is not something that we know in the realm of nafs and aql. Okay. Let's move on to, I think we can take probably one more. Yeah, and this is actually, because it's on the same idea, surrounds the same idea, so it's a further affirmation. النور جند القلب كما أن الظلمة جند النفس فإذا أراد الله أن ينصر عبده أمده بجنود الأنوار وقطع عنه مدد الظلم والأغيار. Okay, I hope that this one they have a good translation for it, because it's really important. Okay, light is the army of the heart, just as darkness is the army of, he translated it as soul, the army of the soul. No, the army of a nafs, the army of consciousness. So light is the army of the heart, just as darkness is the army of consciousness, and nafs, the self, not the soul, a self. So when God wishes to help God's servant, God furnishes him with Junud al-Anwar. He translates this as armies of light, I'll elaborate. And cuts off from him the reinforcement of darkness and alterities. الظلم والأغيار, darkness and alterities. So what he's reminding you of here is that luminosity, as we've already talked about, that luminosity is what, in fact, the heart, the intuitive meaning, the primordial self created within you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is what light is what it covets. That self within you, if it is not corrupted by intoxicants or by drugs, by desires, by intellectualism, it's not corrupted by all the numerous things that human beings corrupted with. It wants luminosity. It wants tranquility. It wants repose. It wants to be at peace. It wants to be liberated. So what it aches for is the light. So then what it's telling you is affirming or bolstering what we've just talked about, is that indeed this light, this enlightenment, think of them as if they are the reinforcements of God. Now, at the same time, at the level of the nafs, the level of the self, the consciousness, what bolsters it, what reinforces it, what strengthens it, are reinforcements of darkness. That's why, as I said, that it is described as the demonic, because in fact, that's where the demonic dwells, in darkness. So, when you are in favor with Allah, and I mean, I'm not one of the people who just believes that there are certain people created for hellfire and people created for heaven. I don't accept that at all. When you are in favor with Allah because of your intentionality and your effort, so you've earned favor with Allah. Uzkuruni azkurkum. Remember me, I will remember you. So you've put in the effort, you've come to you've commended yourself to Allah, you've did everything to say, Allah, take me seriously, because I take you seriously. And Allah does respond. Then Allah will send you the reinforcements of light to conquer your darkness. So quite literally, it's like we exist in a state where we have armies of darkness, our passions, our desires, our impulses. I want what I want, what I desire, from everything, from money to sex to power to all of that is that the callings of the nafs. And the demonic is having a heyday. The demonic is dwelling in it. And, we obey some laws, and because of that effort in obeying some laws, Allah helps us, protects us. But it is not reinforcements of lights. We are not inviting the angelic into our lives. We invite the angelic into our lives when we make that commitment to fight the darkness of the self. And when that commitment is made and the hard work is put in, then Allah comes to our aid so that the darkness retreats, and literally, and the as the light advances, the darkness retreats. Now, there are a couple of concepts that we learn in this context that are important. They often do tell you, I mean, they're often, you do learn that very much think of it as a war between أنوار القلب وظلمة النفس, that the luminosity of the heart and the darkness of the self. And if you do not declare a war on the darkness of the self, there is no reason for it to retreat. And so that's one thing. But the nature of dhulma, the nature of this darkness, they say it's a nukta taqa'u min al-hawa. So what is the nature of this darkness? The darkness is an impulse in response to whimsicalness. So you have a whim. The whim is literally a response to a reaction of the nervous system. The more you answer, or the more you learn to answer the call of the impulse, to satisfy the impulse, the more you condition the self to become spoiled and to have its way. As the self becomes spoiled and to have its way, that's what they call awarid al-wahm. What you actually learn is to embrace whatever delusions, that the self demands so it can satisfy itself. So that is why, for instance, you'll have you ever known someone who cheats on their spouse? Well, the cheating on the spouse, it has a pattern, and the pattern is always an impulse, a desire, answering the impulse and desire, and then delusions of justification. It could be that you actually don't, you could be married to the best person in the world, but because the impulse is there, the desire is there, then you start rationalizing your betrayal. Well, this person is horrible, this person doesn't understand me, this person is, and I've seen this a gazillion times but that is precisely how the self works, but in even more sophisticated ways. So, you start out your career, Allah help me. If you help me to become a doctor, because a lot of immigrants, they study, they take the equivalence exam, there's no chance that you can become a doctor because you went to medical school in overseas or whatever. Oh, Allah help me, if you help me pass the exam, I will, I will serve Islam, a big part of my money will go to good works, I will, oh my God, the number of times I'll tell you, I've heard people make this litany of dua and litany of promises. The very same person, you come meet them a year after they pass the exam, they went to medical school in Cairo or something. And, they were so, oh, Allah, I will do, and they're very humble with you. You meet them 1 year or 2 years after they passed their exam, after, of course, they got their residency and they're about finished with the residency, you literally, as if you meet a different person altogether. Now they've had the impulses, the money started coming in, the sense that I am no longer Sharif or Ahmad or Adil, I am Doctor مش عارف ايه. And their attitude, the way they talk to you, their whole demeanor changed. The rationalization stepped in. Well, of course, I'm not just like any of these graduates from, Egyptian medical schools. I'm special. I passed the exam and I deserve this. Yani, I can't tell you the number of times I've experienced. It's so repetitive that it becomes tedious to the point that, now people from, went to medical school in Syria, Egypt, I don't know, whatever, Iraq, and come say, can you please do dua for me to the exam? I just shake and nod my head and I walk away. Because there's no point. Khalas. Yani, you know what's going to happen. It's so tedious and boring. And it's typical human beings. That's how it is. So that al-dhulma nukta, that they call it a nukta, meaning that it is it's like a seed, and a seed that grows into into awarid al-wahm, into a delusion. And these delusions is the realm of the nafs and the realm of the demonic. They protect you, they guard you, they keep you into the nafs. And they keep you blind. So the more you stay in the delusions of how special you are, how cool you are, how great you are, how gifted you are, how you're God's gift to humanity. I mean, unfortunately I've dealt with a lot of people who are very abusive to others. And the thing that always strikes me about these people is the delusion of their arrogance. They know rationally, they know that Allah could send a little, invisible virus that flattens them. Rationally, logically, they know that all it takes is Allah to give them a little bit of cancer and their whole. But although they know this rationally, the delusions of the self prevents them from being just or fair or compassionate or merciful. They abuse other human beings, they mistreat other human beings, they act like tyrants as if they are God's. These are awarid al-wahm, the delusions of the dhulma, of the darkness, where the demonic dwells and comes and says, you're special, you're something special. You can't just be. Now, so this path, it is nothing if it is not to teach you to be like, to have an allergic reaction to the delusions of the self. These grandiose delusions of the self that tell you you have rights that other people don't have. If you don't get this from this path, then you've got nothing. Then your whole journey is nothing. And the other very important concept is, maybe, let's see if maybe I find language. Yeah, so it's a concept of the tree that I just what number? Do you know? Can you find the concept of the tree in around number 54? I mean, I could just try to.
The water and the tree.
Yeah, where is it?
Um,
It's there.
yeah, it's in here. I need a second to find it. Yeah, but yeah.
Where?
The idea that
Okay, yeah, okay, I found it. Yeah, and so that the the, the critical now they want to tell you that النفس والعقل والقلب والروح والسر, all these things, they're not separate entities. They are names for awarid. They are names for states. But they're all describing a single essence. So it is as if it's not that you have within the human being different essences. One is the consciousness, the other is, but they are actually a single essence. But that single essence, and the image that I was looking for, and I think it says وحده هو اللطيف الربانية النورانية كمال مصر. Yeah. So it is like water that a plant feeds on. And the plant grows to sprout branches and leaves and flowers. And say that the light of God comes, it's like that water. It comes to a single entity, that tree, leading that entity to sprout a branch, a leaf, a flower. So if you will, let's say, the branch is a qalb, the leaf is a rawh, and the flower is the sir. So it works within into higher states of consciousness and higher states of perception. Now, so you ultimately, this path, although we start out by saying that you are fighting the self, but where it ends up taking you is that you are in harmony with the self. That same self that at one point at the beginning you were looking at as antagonistic to you because it was full of impulses and desires and whims and so on. Actually, you exist in harmony with that self because it becomes your ally in the project of your own liberation. So, put more concretely, one of the most common questions you get with people traveling this path is you go to your sheikh and say, because of course, you're having a hard time at the beginning and all of that. You go and say, will I ever reach a point where my impulses, my whims are consistent with what is pleasing to Allah? Am I always going to have whims that are from shaitan? And absolutely the answer is yes. This path takes you to a point where you no longer experience impulses and whims that are inconsistent with illumination and the divine. So it put in very blunt and concrete ways, you get to a point where the material no longer means anything to you. You get to a point where you no longer desire what you used to desire. So it is precisely now the tree has grown, fed by the water of the divine. The tree has branched, has a leaf, has a flower. And that self-perception of integrity and harmony is very important to your own development in this process, because you are, I mean, in extreme forms. Like I remember, examples where I've never seen it, but I was told that examples of people like, misunderstand the concept of war with the self. And they start doing things like self-flagellation, or they, hurt themselves and so on. And no, this path is not to hate yourself. This is not like the medieval Catholic Church, which often, went down a path of hating and disciplining and harming the self in order to teach it to emerge into a different essence. This is a very different path than that. You are actually, what you start out, yes, you start out resisting the self, the nafs, but what you end up with, actually, you are in such tranquility that you learn to love and care for the self, because it is now worthy of your love, because it has transformed. What time is it?
8:30.
Okay, let's stop here, because we will need to pray. Remind me that, to start with 54, now we start with 55, inshallah.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. As always, there's really never enough words to thank you for the wisdom, and we covered so much. I know that we often get these questions, like you actually addressed it again tonight, and so many of the things that we do, people have asked, for example, like the question of, why do we worship God if all we want is for God to like reward us, with like material things? And so this is, and we get a lot of questions that are similar to that. So this is like so blessed and so meaningful. I just, there's nothing to say except thank you. And even like when you are translating these English, the English translations, because those meanings of those words that you correct for us are so like critical. They're so important for our like deeper understanding. I'm always reminded what a gift this is, that if we only had the English translation to wrestle with, we wouldn't get that insight and that wisdom from your experience. And so it really transforms our understanding of this text as non-Arabic speakers and people who haven't gone through the halakha journeys that you've gone through. And so thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's just truly a blessing and a gift. I just wanted to let people know that next week our halakha will be on Sunday, not on Saturday. So, that'll be October the 1st at 6 o'clock, inshallah. So please make note of that. And thank you, everybody, for being with us again for this wonderful journey. And inshallah, we'll hope to see you next week. I owe some of the people here emails responses back, so my apologies to you here. You know who you are. So anyway, I'm going to try and get caught up, and thank you so much for being with us, and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Have a great week.